Well, that can't be good. I titled this video the almost ultimate guide to the Kwikee step, and hopefully that expectation is met. If not, I'll try to follow up with some more in the comments. If you're looking for the best deal on repair parts, well, I will be sharing that throughout the video, so keep an eye out for it. Let's get started in diagnosing and repairing a Kwikee brand motorized step. As you heard in the intro, mine's making some pretty bad noises. But before diving into my problem, let me cover a few different situations that you may be having that are less severe and easier to repair. First, what is the physical condition of your step? Is it bent? If so, we can address that, but not until we disconnect the motor assembly. You don't want to cause any further damage, so wait until you get that motor disconnected before you pound it back into shape. Second, when was the last time you cleaned and lubricated the step? There are a lot of lubrication points on the step, basically everywhere you see a pivot point, and you're going to want to lube that. Now, Kwikee does sell a brand of spray lubricant, but if you don't have that, you can try a waterproof lubricant, something that doesn't attract dirt. So I use silicone spray and white lithium grease. They both worked really well for me. If not, just try to avoid something like WD-40 or any oil-based lubricants, as they're just going to attract more dirt. And this step is going to gather a lot of dirt just from being under the coach and being exposed to all the elements. Next thing is check the step. Is there anything stuck in the step? Pick up a stick. Do you, maybe some dirt and grime or something that's gotten wedged in there. Also, those little carpet treads that you can put on these steps, Kwikee does not want you to use those. They recommend against that. They can bind up in the step, when they get old, frayed, or just, maybe they're too thick and there's not enough room in there for them. So try to avoid using those treads if you can. Go to something like this grip tape. It'll work just fine. Your battery. Is your battery fully charged? If this step is not making any terrible noises, it's not grinding or clicking or anything like that, but it's just kind of going out slow or not all the way, something like that, chances are your battery's just low. You can have a low battery even though you're plugged in, because again, this is on the 12-volt system, so it's possible that that's your problem. Could also be your door sensor. So on your door, you're going to have a little magnet right here that is going to tie in to the magnet that's on the bottom of this door frame right here. And that's how the controller board knows when to open or close the step. So it's possible you've broken a wire or something's come loose and they're not matching up well. So definitely check the door sensor. Next, fuses. Don't forget to check your fuses. Now, one quick thing you can do before diving in and trying to find out where the fuse is for this step, there's probably a couple things you can check. On mine, I've got a little step entry light right here. If I turn that switch on, the step will stay out when the door's closed. And if that light illuminates on that switch, then chances are there's power to the step. Also, you might have a light underneath your step. So if that turns on, you've definitely got power to that control board. So a fuse is most likely not your problem. If that doesn't work, you're gonna have to dig around and try to find the fuse. So that's basically some of the simple things that you can do to diagnose your step. In my case, it's a little more severe, so we're gonna dive in and take a look at what we can do there. Before we go any further, safety first. This step is very powerful. It can definitely injure you if you get caught in the pinch points. So let's make sure there's no possibility for the power to the step. You can do this by shutting off your main power switches using your battery disconnect or disconnecting the battery cables. So we're going to start here, and I've got two switches. I'm going to make sure they're both turned off. And again, there is a disconnect for your batteries. In my case, it's down here in my compartment. I would turn this, okay? And then finally, if you still don't feel comfortable that you've truly disconnected all the power, you might have to get into your step, pull a power cable, maybe under the engine. Again, you don't know which cable, or I'm sorry, which battery is actually going to run your step. So you want to make sure absolutely there's no way this step is going to turn on before you climb under the unit. Lastly, since you're going to be under the coach, make sure that you chock the wheels. So you definitely don't want to get under your coach without having the wheels chocked. So next, hopefully you're fortunate enough with the step was able to come down, because you're going to need to have the step down in order to remove this motor assembly. If you weren't fortunate enough, you might be able to pull this cotter pin here, slide the pin out, and which basically disconnects this whole motor from the step, and you'll be able to manually pull the step down. If not, worst case, you might have to go to these big bolts here. There should be one in each corner that'll let you remove the entire step assembly. Again, hopefully you don't have to do that. Mine, I was lucky enough to get the step to come down, just a little bit of grinding, as you heard. So what we're going to do now is we're going to remove this motor assembly. First thing is there's a power connector on the motor right here. We're going to need to disconnect that. Next, we want to take these 4 nuts off of here, and that's going to let this entire assembly come down, and it'll basically hang on this pin here. And that's why you want to do this last, so you've got something to kind of hang it by. Then you're going to pull this cotter pin here, pull the pin out, and you'll be able to remove the entire assembly. So I'll go ahead and do that, and then I'll show you what it looks like here on the bench. Okay, just a quick tip. Once you've taken the motor assembly out, you'll notice that these bolts can actually go up inside. So be careful not to do that, because it's really hard to get your arm in from the end here to feed them back in. So be careful not to push them up in there. I went ahead and just put kind of some side tension on it and put the nuts back on, just in case this repair takes me a few days and I would need to move the RV. I wouldn't want one of those popping out. So just take note of that. Okay, now that we've got the motor assembly out of the coach, let's take a look at a few of the tools that we're going to need to disassemble it. You're going to need a Phillips screwdriver, a 10mm socket, a small pick or possibly a screwdriver, and a set of snap ring pliers. So if you go online and you look for Kwikee, you may not find that company. It's because the company is actually Lippert. Lippert provides the sales, service, and support for the Kwikee brand. I'll put a link in the comments for their website. But before you head over there for parts, keep watching. I might have a better option for you. But I would, however, like to give a huge shout out to Lippert Support. They were great in helping me identify the step model I had as well as the parts I needed. It did take a while, as there was some confusion between us as to what parts I was looking for. You know, I had a manual, talked all about the model, like 20, 30, 40, but it turns out my step wasn't in that manual. I have what they call the premium step. You know, it's basically a higher gauge material, and it has some extra bracing on the back. You know, Lippert Support, they stayed on the phone with me for like over 30 minutes. You know, they emailed me some technical drawings, and they made sure to explain what parts they could provide. You know, it is rare to get that level of support these days, and I really do appreciate it. They were great. So I would highly encourage, if you've got a problem, reach out to them. They will definitely help you find the right thing you need to get your step repaired. So from what I could gather from their information and speaking to their support, Kwikee sells basically three main types of gearbox and motor assemblies. You know, there's an A, a B, and a C, and there may be even some older ones. The A is the newest, and that's what I have. It has this curved arm here. And the B has a straight arm, and the C, it just kind of looks completely different. So you can find more information on that online. So there is a quick note though, Kwikee does sell a conversion to put an A assembly in place of a B assembly. So if you want to upgrade, you might consider doing that. They also, I want to note that on this A assembly, when I was looking at their engineering drawings, they had a note on there that said in 2016 that they went from a cast assembly to a forged assembly. So if your step is older than 2016, you know, or you got an older model, it sounds like they tried to beef this up a little bit, try to improve some things, so you want to make sure that you get one of the newer ones. So this assembly is actually made up of two different parts. You've got the lower gearbox, and you've got the motor assembly. And what we're going to do here is we're going to start by separating these two parts, and by removing the three bolts here. These are going to take your 10mm socket, and then we're going to set that aside and take a look inside the main gearbox. All right, so we finish up by removing this final bolt here, set it aside, and all you need to do is lift this straight up. Okay, we'll flip that over. And what you're going to find here is there should be two washers. Okay, we'll set them aside. And then in here, there's going to be a pinion gear. Now it's going to be full of grease, so it's a little hard to get a hold of. All right, what you got here is you got a pinion gear. The first thing you want to do is you want to inspect this pinion gear. You want to make sure that all the teeth are still there, there's no foreign material in there, and it basically looks in good shape, which mine does. This looks fine. One caution is that this little pin in the center, as you can see, it does push in, comes out the other side. That's to align this pinion gear in the bottom of this gearbox. So just make sure you don't lose that pin. Next, you've got this gearbox here, and this is where you probably suspect your problem is. That's where I thought my problem was, but it turns out this gear is also metal. So unless you've got a very significant failure, chances are the problem's not in here. But go ahead and inspect that. All you have to do is turn the arm and inspect all of those teeth. Make sure they're all there, they're not worn down, they look like they're in good shape. And if they are, good, we can move on to the next part. If they're not, I do have a trick for you. So here's a tip. As you see, I'm only using about half of that gear through this swing. It is possible to take this arm off, rotate this gear 180 degrees, and put the arm back on, so you'll be using a fresh set of the teeth over here. So if you have a damaged gearbox in here, you may be able to get away with simply using that trick and not having to buy an entire new gearbox. So try that if you need to. Next, we want to check this arm assembly. Okay, this arm assembly is basically a ball, and it's got a couple brass keepers around it. So this thing needs to move very, very easily. And what you'll find is on some of the older ones, they didn't use that brass keeper, and the arm over time would wear, and the arm would actually pop off. So you're constantly fighting keeping that arm on there. They've vastly improved that design, but what you need to do is, this is kind of a serviceable item that you need to take care of, and there's a snap ring here. So use your snap ring pliers, pull that off. There's a washer here. This will lift off, and just clean everything out of there. Get all the dirt and grime, all the sand, everything that's in there. Apply some of your grease, put it back together. So it should move very, very smoothly. Basically no effort whatsoever to move this around. If you haven't serviced this in a while, this could be your problem. It might be bound up in there, and the motor's trying so hard to move this that it can't. So definitely check this. If your gearbox is in good shape, go ahead and service this. If you need a new gearbox, don't waste your time. So next we're going to move on to the motor assembly. So again, this is where the motor, and this is a gearbox in here. So take this apart. We're going to start by removing the motor. There's going to be 4 screws on each corner of the motor. We're going to remove them and then simply pull the motor straight out. Now that I have all 4 screws out, we're going to go ahead and take the motor apart from the gearbox. Now if you look closely, there's actually a brush assembly that is right in front of the motor, between the motor and the gearbox. So as you pull the motor out, don't be surprised, that might stay in with the gearbox, it might come out with the motor. Either way, it's not really going to be a problem. So you just take this motor, you're going to kind of have to wiggle it back and forth, and as you pull out, in my case, the motor's coming out separate from the gearbox, or from the brush assembly. That's fine. Here's the brush assembly. Okay. So what you want to do is you want to inspect this. Take a look at those brushes. Now hopefully they're still in good condition. These look like they're in pretty good condition. I don't really see too much wear on them. So I think this motor is fine in regards to working. Now there's going to be a trick when you have to put this back together. You're going to have to push these brushes back in. So let me flip this over this way. And all you need to do is take your small pick, like I have here. And what you're going to do is you're going to push this brush back in. And you want to actually push it in far enough to where it stays in. Okay. And I'll do the same with the other side. Okay. And what you're going to see is that now that little spring that was putting tension on the back of the brush is now holding the brush wide open, so that you'll be able to get that comb back in there. Now the trick is, when you put this back over the comb, there's a little slot down here, as you can see, and all you have to do is put this on the motor and then use your pick to push that. You'll push the brush forward and snap it back in place. So that's the easiest way to get this back together. Otherwise it can be quite a bear. Now let's take a look at the motor. So what we got here is we have a worm gear. We'll talk about more in a minute. But we've got a comm. There's a commutator here. Again, this is a simple DC motor. Now what you want to do is you want to clean up this comm. You can do that with some electronic cleaner, use a pencil eraser, anything that you can get that as shiny as you can. Don't use rough sandpaper or anything. You need this thing to stay smooth. And finally, take your pick and go in between where those grooves are. Carbon can build up in there, and what it'll do is actually start kind of shorting out the motor and making it weak. So if you got a step that's acting a little weak, that's a good tip. Just really clean that out good, polish this comm up the best you can, and it'll really help this motor last a lot longer for you. All right, so put that aside. Next, we want to move into the gearbox. Now, I suspect this is where my problem is. This is where all of the bad noise from mine is happening. So what I need to do here is I need to take off these 2 screws so I can access the gear that's in here. All right, now that I have those 2 screws off, all we need to do is lift this cover off. Okay, it's going to have some grease on there, and now you've got your gear in here. But let's take a look where that worm gear from the motor goes in. So if you take a look, hopefully I can get a good picture here, you can see the gear in there. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate this. Try to do this one-handed. Okay, so you see I'm seeing good gear. Everything looks fine. Oh, right there. I start to lose the gear. So this gear is definitely stripped out. I'll keep rotating and we get back to good gear. Okay, so we've definitely got a bad gear. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take the gear out so we can take a look a little closer at it. What that's going to require is removing this snap ring, okay, and then this washer, and it'll let us push this gear out. So let me go ahead and remove that snap ring. The snap ring, the washer that sits on top of here, and now what I can do is I can flip this over and actually push this out, and this piece is going to come out. This is what actually helps turn the gear, so we'll just set that aside. Now what you've got here is you've got your plastic gear, but this gear has a rubber insert, which I'll talk about here in a minute. But let's go ahead and get this gear out. Now, there's a couple ways to do this. You can try to get a screwdriver in there. For me, what I did is I kind of turned it over and just popped it out, give it a little smack there, and it'll come right out. Now, this is the plastic gear we're talking about. So as I spin this, yep, right there, there's 25% of that gear is completely missing. So you've got to ask yourself, why is this happening? Why did we lose this gear? And this is what I think is the most important thing in this video, is to understand exactly how this is happening so we can prevent it in the future. First, you need to understand how this step works, okay? The motor that deploys and retracts the step, there's a control board that tells the motor when to stop, and because it doesn't know how to stop on its own. It reads the power or the current going through the motor. So when the step is fully deployed or retracts, it basically stalls the motor. Okay, the motor's still trying to move, but it can't, right? It's hit the end of the movement, so it stalls. And what this does, it causes the motor to draw a lot more power. And when the control board sees this, it stops the motor. So the design is to put full motor torque from this metal worm gear onto this plastic gear. Okay, guess which one's gonna fail? Yeah, it's gonna be the plastic one. The full torque happens every time you move the step in or move the step out. You know, this same design is also used in power windows on your car. The difference is in those power windows, they have springs to help absorb some of that load. So it kind of slows that window down when it gets to the end of its travel, and it helps that motor detect or have a little more time to stop before it finally hits its final resting place. This unit doesn't have that. All it has is this little rubber insert here. And again, this little rubber insert will pull right out. And what it'll do, again, it's just a shock absorber, but the problem is I don't know if it's enough shock absorber for what's happening here, okay? So the real problem, or why this is probably happening where it's stripping, yes, the motor's applying a lot of torque to the gear. Over time, it's going to probably chew up this gear, but that's really not the reason I think this is happening to most of us. What's happening is we open the door and we start to step out, but we realize that the power step is not fully deployed. It's still on its way out, but so are you, right? So you end up putting your weight on the step before it's fully deployed. So all of your weight just went on this plastic gear, and most likely that's how they're getting stripped out. So that's the reason that you need to try to avoid at all costs. Make sure nothing is stepping on that as it's going out. There's nothing binding that stuff, nothing that is preventing this motor from doing what it wants to do. Now, Lippert is coming out with a new motor that has less torque. This particular motor has 18 Newton meters. That's a measurement of torque. And the new motor has 14 Newton meters. I think it's actually similar in torque to what the really old motor is that they had. So maybe that's why they're lowering the torque. I'm not sure. Support just told me that this month, January 2020, they're coming out with a replacement motor that has less torque. If that's something that you want to consider going to, a slightly less torque motor to try to save your gear, talk to them. Talk to Lippert Support. They'll tell you exactly what you need. Make sure you get the right parts. So now that we know what the problem is, how do we get parts? I called Lippert to see if I could buy just this gear. Unfortunately, they did not have a SKU for just the gear. All they could offer was a complete motor assembly, which was a little over $100. The support person, they did pull a motor assembly off the shelf, and they tried to find a part number on this gear, but they weren't successful. So I asked them if they could, at least get a message over their engineering group, see if they could make this gear available. They said they would try, so I appreciate that. Again, I appreciate all the help that Lippert Support gave me in this entire project. But I wasn't about to give up. I did a little more research. Maybe there's some other gear out there I could find that would work for this. During my research, what I was basically able to figure out was this motor assembly and this gearbox is actually made by a company called AM Equipment. They're the actual manufacturer of these. So they have a website, and their website offers these components for sale. So as I promised earlier in the video, another supplier for parts would be AM Equipment. And AM Equipment has this motor assembly right now in January 2020 for, I believe it was $68 and change. So they are less expensive than Lippert. But again, I do want to give that shout out to Lippert because of their support, because of the people that I talked to, because they sent me drawings. They've done everything they possibly could. Honestly, I wouldn't feel bad about spending a little more money with Lippert just because I know that they're going to be there. But if you're looking for more than one supplier, maybe one of them's out of stock, maybe you've got a delay, whatever, either one of these suppliers will have what you need to get you the parts. So I also want to give a shout out to both Lippert and AM Equipment. If you're watching this video, let me explain why selling this gear would be good business for you. Right now, you're selling this motor assembly for $70. Okay, probably half of that's your manufacturing cost. Then you have to add in the cost to stock it in a warehouse, and you got some shipping and handling. So it's all said and done, you're probably not making any profit. But what you do offer is a warranty. So if the motor assembly dies in the next couple of years, you're going to replace it at your cost. So where's the profit? However, if you sold me just this gear, or say $10, you'd have very little manufacturing cost for this, and it'd probably be less than $1 to make this thing. Then you have little warehousing. You know, it wouldn't take much to stock a bunch of these. Shipping, throw in the little yellow envelope. You could ship it out to me for almost nothing. And chances are, if you sold to me for like $10, I'd probably buy 2 or 3 of these things, because I'm guaranteed at some point this part is going to fail. This is the weak link in the entire system. So I would feel good. I've got a couple spares on hand if this thing goes out. You know, you've got low cost. You're going to make $20 or $30 just, you know, by selling me this gear, and there's no warranty behind it. You know, but I'll feel good because I'll be able to replace my step, or, you know, fix my step for $10, $20. So it'd really be a good thing for all of us. So I implore you, please consider selling just this gear so that we can get our step assemblies repaired without having to replace entire, you know, motors and gearboxes. Okay. I also want to ask the viewers, if you have this problem, if your gear has done this, send an email. Contact both Lippert and AM Equipment. Let them know you've had this problem and you want to be able to buy just this gear. I think as a community, if we all, you know, contact them and let them know what the problem is, we've got a better chance at them considering it. So in regards to my repair, let's talk about how I fixed mine. Now, I was able to take a look at this gearbox, and if I can zoom in here, you're going to see a couple impressions here during manufacturing. And this shows me it's got a 3 and a 17. So this is telling me that this gearbox is manufactured in the 3rd month of 2017. So due to that, Lippert felt I was close enough to my warranty period where they went ahead and did a goodwill effort on me, and they replaced this component, no cost to me. So again, I give them a couple shout outs to Lippert, but I thought that was great. I didn't expect it. I was just trying to find a part, and they went ahead and took care of this. So again, I appreciate that. I knew parts out of the box from Lippert, and here's what we got. They sent me a new gearbox. Wasn't expecting that. I think just due to the problems that I was having, they want to make sure I got the right part. Again, I really appreciate that from them. I also see that the dates on this unit here is November of 2019. So this is definitely brand new. Just to compare it side by side with my other one, I don't really see any differences from the outside. Looks like everything matches up. There's really nothing on the bottom to compare. So they are still essentially the identical gearbox. Okay, put these on the side here. And what you're going to get is you're going to have a couple of washers. Again, these go on top of the spinning gear, so make sure you don't lose them. And then we've got the new motor assembly. And again, I've already reassembled my old one, but it does look very similar. I'm not seeing a difference here. Okay, except one big thing. Earlier in the video I talked about this is an 18 Newton meter motor. Guess what this one is? 14 Newton meter motor. So it looks like, and if I check the date on this gearbox here, yep, 2019, January of 2019. This thing was fairly new gearbox. I mean, it's 1 year old as of now, but it's definitely newer than what I had. But it does look like they've got the new motor. So when I get this put together, let me take a look and see if I actually notice any difference in the power. Good news is, if I do, if I actually don't like what I see here, I suppose I could go back to the old motor, but I don't suspect I'll do that. I'm guessing this is really going to help try to save that gear. So let me get this assembled, and we'll take a look at how it performs. Okay, so let me show the reassembly of the new parts that I received. First things first, we're going to take these 2 washers and we're going to put them on the shaft here. Next, because this, essentially, looking at the old one, because this unit actually hangs under the RV like this, I want to make sure that I don't lose my new gearbox motor assembly. So I'm going to take some thread locker and just put a little bit on the end of these bolts. I want to make sure I don't lose this guy. All right, so now what you're going to do, now that you've got these 2 washers on here, you need to align this shaft into this pinion without losing those washers. So this is the orientation that you're going to want to have the gearbox as you set this motor back on here and bolt it down. And then put your bolts in. Okay. Now, one thing you want to make sure you do not do is over torque these bolts. You just want to snug them up and then just give them just a hair more but don't crank them down. You're going through a plastic gearbox, and if you do tighten them too much, you can cause a binding on this gearbox here, and that can actually stop that motor from working. So just make sure you don't over tighten this. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and snug them up, and then we'll get under the coach and reassemble this. Before we put this gearbox assembly back in, let's take one final look at the step. So we want to make sure that this step moves freely. All you need to do if your step is deployed is just pick up a little bit on the bottom, push it all the way in, and let it flop out. Okay, it needs to move extremely smooth. If not, you might have to lubricate it. If something's bent, now's the time to fix it. Remember we talked earlier in the video that if you've got a bent step, disconnect the motor. Now with it free, we can go ahead and adjust this step however we need to make sure it moves freely. Finally, if the step is all the way deployed and you push in on it, it should not retract. You should have to give it a slight lift to start that motion. And what that is Kwikee's designed some cams in here underneath the very back. So I'm gonna get my camera in here. Might have to get under the coach. So right up under here, you see that? What looks like a bolt right here? It's kind of offset. There's actually a plastic cam, and that can be adjusted. And you do that if you follow their manual. It'll talk about how to adjust that cam stop. But what you want is if you want this to come all the way down and actually kind of lock in a down position before it hits that cam stop. If your step is maybe about right here and it hasn't locked all the way down, you're putting a lot of extra pressure against that gear. So that could also be why you've damaged the gear. You want the step to be at its full mechanical extension and locked in so that there's no pressure whatsoever on that gear. Otherwise you're going to wear that out. All right, so now we'll get under here and we will reinstall this motor gearbox assembly. Okay. Now these were the 4 bolts or nuts that we've taken off these bolts originally. And what we're going to need to do here is we're going to take these off. Remember, we put these on there for a reason. These bolts can push up inside, and if that happens, you have to get your arm back up under here all the way down in order to try to hold them in, and that's quite a challenge. So hopefully you still got them and they haven't done that to you. One final look. This is the control board. I don't know if I had a good picture of it originally. You got your light here. Check all your electrical connections while you're here. You don't have your motor assembly in here that's in your way, so you just want to check everything. Make sure none of the wires are, broken or corroded or anything like that. This is the perfect time to do that. If you decide you want to lubricate these points right in here, this is probably one of the only times you're going to get a chance to do that because the motor assembly and the step and everything are kind of in your way. So you want to go ahead and do that. So I'll go ahead and I'll start by putting the gearbox, hanging it off of here, and then I will swing it up. Have to take these nuts off here, and then I'll swing it up and then put the nuts on and connect the electric wire back to the motor, and that should be it. Well, then we'll be able to test this thing out. All right, so I'm just tightening up the last few bolts here. This one here, you're actually gonna have to have a 7/16 wrench. If I didn't mention that before, these nuts are 7/16. So you're gonna make sure you get these good and tight. Be all 4 of them. I've got to connect the power, and then we should be ready to go. Final thing, you've got everything connected now. Before you turn the power back on your step, make sure you don't step on the step yet, because again, it probably isn't 100% deployed on those cam stops. So you're gonna have to take the big leap and step all the way up to get inside, turn your batteries on, okay, and then that step will go out its last little bit. Okay, at this point you should be able to close your door, and if everything works, it should sound like that. All right, so I think we've got a successful repair here. I tell you what, that 14 Newton meter motor seems like it's doing just fine. Okay, and you can see what I was talking about. If you have one of those carpets in there, you can really bind this thing up. So again, I would recommend against that. All right, so just in case, I'm curious what this looks like. Let me get underneath. Again, stay clear of the stuff. You don't want to get any pinch point, but let's watch it operate. I'll close the door here. All right, check it all out, make sure nothing's binding. And I don't know if you noticed that. I'm going to close it one more time. And watch as this gets to fully extended. You'll actually see that motor give a little extra push. So you got a little extra push at the end. Okay, and I've got my step open, and I mean it's tight. There's no movement here. That it is definitely locked out. So again, that may be part of what's hurting that gear over time. So we'll see how long this one lasts. But we got a successful repair. Everything's working. All my wires, check them one final time. We've got a successful repair of my Kwikee brand motorized step. If you liked this video, if it was helpful at all, please hit the like button, the subscribe, use the bell. I'll be putting more videos out as I come up with the content. But let me know if this was helpful to you. That's basically the payment I get for doing these videos. So appreciate any feedback that you got. Thanks everyone. I'll see you on the next.